All right, hey, what's up, guys? So before we drill down into more examples and whatnot, let's talk about the characteristics or the general characteristics associated with trading either accumulation-based MBs or the momentum continuation-based MBs. And this is actually going to segue very nicely into our understanding of the V time frame as well, because, and I'm going to give you guys the hint and the spoiler right now, which you should already be aware of because we've went through a number of videos and a number of examples using these two schematics in front of you, right? What you might have noticed is if you pay attention directly to what I drew right here on the validation time frame with the 10 and the 20 primarily, in terms of how the delivery of these stages goes, so primarily stage 1 into stage 2, stage 1 into stage 2, right? Because these are, after all, stages. What you might notice is that if you were to draw, let's say, just kind of a box or whatever around each one of these, or notice where they are, they're actually acting as momentum-based MBs. So a lot of the time, the momentum-based MBs, okay, of a higher time frame or of the validation time frame are actually going to be the precedent or the potential step for the entry time frame to undergo accumulation-based entries, accumulation MB-based entries, because the momentum is now, when the momentum's going through some kind of momentum MB continuation, we know that a lower time frame of that's going to be going through accumulation. So that's your like mini hint or your mini intro and further intro to what the validation actually is doing and why we're learning to think about entry types in this way, because you can now take that and understand that fractally. But before we do that, let's talk about the actual characteristics of accumulation-based MBs or momentum continuation-based MBs, what they generally mean for you, how they kind of occur. Then we'll look at a few examples and move from there. So for the most part, when we're looking at an accumulation-based MB, which are the ones that you've seen me basically look at a number of times now. These are the entries where, price maybe flushes out big time. You start getting the accumulation-based MBs here. That starts to stage 2, and then maybe there's a flush or a deeper flush, and then it starts new accumulation-based MBs through here and starts making a move. Maybe another flush. Maybe it flushes out big time, and then maybe you get a move inside of here that all of a sudden ends up making kind of a move that sustains itself and goes crazy and then collapses, right? So this is usually what a market, tends to deliver like if there's a trend. And accumulation MBs, as per the diagrams we've looked at already, are the ones that pretty much occur inside of all these areas here, right? Just as we saw in the example here, the accumulation-based MBs or the initial MBs are usually the ones that happen off of the flushes, basically inside of these areas here, these areas here, these areas here, these areas here. And you could even consider them in some areas like this because these minor moves here could still act as minor versions of flush outs. Okay, so the characteristics of the accumulation-based MBs for the most part, right, is that they happen within the flush and the stage 1 of a buildup, right? So it's always going to be within kind of a flush or after some kind of flush or in the stage 1 buildup that then leads to that stage 2, right? That's the very simple way to think about it. That's where these accumulation MBs usually occur. So as a result, that's where we're generally looking to get positioned, right? In some scenarios, right, if a move, let's say, flushes out, maybe makes an MB, but then never really makes an MB here. Instead, maybe it's like an FF MB. And we just kind of missed that trade, right? By the time it's doing this, we know we're now in momentum based. We're no longer in the MBs because the stage 2 has very likely now started. So we can't anymore assume accumulation based MBs until price either takes off, flushes out, and gives us new entries around here, or until it flushes out deeper, which is what we oftentimes see, right? A flush might start a move that then goes into a deeper flush, where then we get some beautiful maybe MBs down here, accumulation-based MBs, as we like to call them, that start that accumulation, that start the actual stage 2. So usually these accumulation-based MBs, one of the characteristics of them is that they happen within a flush or a stage 1, right? Or flush plus. Now, another characteristic of it, even though we haven't covered moving averages just yet, but we've seen examples, countless examples, and countless images with it. So we're going to mention it before we get into all the deeper MA-based stuff, which is that it usually comes from a deeper flush in terms of coming down below the 10 or 20 EMA or the 5, 10, or 20 EMA on the validation timeframe. So both of these are ways to measure or ways to validate whether or not we are in a flush or accumulation-based MB. So oftentimes, and just to explain this further, if we're looking at the entry timeframe right now, let's assume that this is the entry timeframe right here, through a flush, what we've noticed will happen is that price will start moving. Maybe this is like the 10 EMA right here. It'll probably be something like this, right? Maybe the 20 EMA was doing something like this, or maybe something like this, right? Where the flush out basically comes under the 10/20 EMA on the entry time frame, right? And then it might start making those MBs through that move to start that stage 2, that actually starts and kickstarts the continuation, right? That's one way that a flush can occur. That's where it comes just below the 10/20. And sometimes, right, based on the kind of trading you're doing, you could even get away with, let's say this is the 10 EMA. And I'll show you why. Sometimes a flush could be as much as this, where the 20 is still kind of going like this, right? This reference comes in, but sometimes this can also be considered. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen versions of prices move and work like this as well, where price might just come to the 10 or just under the 10 and start going, right? So usually these accumulation-based MBs as a characteristic will start to form and create opportunities just below the 10 or 20 EMA on the entry time frame, or just under or at the 5, 10, or 20 EMA on the validation time frame. So the way I want you to think about this is if this entry time frame right here, let's assume is a 1 minute chart. So let's assume the 1 minute chart has been doing something like this, right? Maybe moving up, maybe all the moving averages have been kind of moving up too, and then maybe it flushes out for a bigger stage, and it's under the 10 and 20, maybe something like this, right? If we then look at a 6-minute chart, or we throw a 6-minute moving averages on top. So if we now consider the validation time frame, which let's say is the 6-minute in this case, right? So we're just multiplying this by 6. But again, for some of you, that might be a 3-minute or a 10-minute. This is just based on preference, but let's just assume it's a 6-minute, right? What you will also see is this could be right here, right? A 10, right? Maybe there's a 20, like somewhere here, something along these lines. And maybe there's a 5 somewhere like here, right? Well, the 5 would probably be doing something like this, right? A 5 EMA. So on the validation time frame, if we were to step up to that time frame, if we were to specifically literally look at the validation time frame, the way we would see price, once again, is that if this is, let's say, a 10, this is, let's say, a 20, and then we could even we could draw the 5 just as an example. If we saw this, right, the actual price action would look something like this, right? And you can see how this starts to formulate the beginning stages or understandings that we saw right here, which is that on the validation time frame, right, what you're going to see is you're going to see stages that start delivering through basically the interaction of the 10 and 20 and through their given momentum, right? And now if we prorate that, or we take that understanding a little bit further, what you then end up seeing, right, is what we see here, which is that on the entry time frame for accumulation-based MBs, you will see the good trades or good setups, the stage ones that occur, happen just below the 10 or 20 EMA on the entry time frame. So let's make sure we specify this and understand this because it's important. Entry time frame, right? And we'll make this bold. Or the 5, 10, 20 EMA on the validation time frame. So again, these two, in terms of where we're looking at these moving averages and where they're occurring, are different, but they are once again elements of potentially making your system just a little bit better, right? Because again, in some scenarios for you, just this understanding might be the difference between a good trade or a trade that you completely stay out of that ends up being choppy or something, right? But this is how they interact together. The entry time frame is going to have these flush outs that happen at the 10, 20 or just under. Sometimes you'll come under maybe the 10, and a lot of the time deciding whether or not it might be worth taking risk on or not, right, will now come down to what the validation is up to. And sometimes the validation, as I said a second ago, right, if we are looking at the validation time frame moving averages, so basically of the higher time frame, you'll see price basically come kind of into the 5, 10, or 20 to keep going, because on the validation time frame, what's happening is this right here. So let me show you a quick example of that so we don't draw too much confusion, but I just want to show you this happening, and then we'll move from there. So if I open up my own trading view here just for a second, and I go to GPTC, again, this is an example I've used a few times in my overall in this portal so far, right? But one of the best trades that I took this year so far, so again, this is in relation to 2024, one of the best trades I took this year was this entry right here. And I've already shown you guys this as an example, but MB1, MB2, this was the entry I personally took, right? This is the entry I personally traded. And this ended up being a very, very big and very nice winner for myself. Now, again, let's take a look at the characteristics that we just discussed in reference to this trade. So again, you've seen this trade a few times, but now every time you've seen this trade, you've had the ability to add some of the stuff that you've learned in the portal, or some of the concepts you've now heard and seen in the portal, to the trade itself, so you can get even a little bit better, right? So cyclically, in terms of where we are in the cycle on this, right, we understood that this was likely some kind of major flush. We've already spoken about that. We've already discussed that, right? And again, that did lead to some of those MBs that began to form down here. And now you actually get introduced to an idea behind, what could help you make sense of if you could trade the MBs down here through the fact this was a major flush, right? Because I'm sure you've seen, based on the videos we've already released, right? A lot of the time my trades were somewhat taken in these areas, even this trade itself, right, was taken in these areas here, basically, right? But some of you may be asking, what might permit a potential entry within, the first maybe buildup of stage 1s and 2s. And that's where that same validation timeframe thing comes in, where, price has flushed below those 10 and 20s very clearly. But now, and what I'm doing here, right, is this is available to everyone on TradingView as well. It's free right now, but I might make it part of the MentaFX Premium and part of the tools that you guys have access to, like the screener. So you'll know if that's available. But this one's available right now, right? You can just find it under MentaFX Averages Multi-Time Frame. It's completely free, and you can add that. And if we basically click on this and we add the 5, the 10, and the 20, like we just spoke about, and we add it to a validation time frame. So in my case, if we're looking at a 65-minute chart, I simply made the validation time frame a day, or you can make it 5 hours. So just to make it really easy on you with the rules, right? 65-minute times 6 puts us at 390. Over 60 is 6.5 hours. So if we really want to get crazy, I can put this all at 6 hours. It doesn't really matter. The point is still the same. So I'll put it at 6 hours, and I have it set to the 5, 10, and 20, right, for validation time frame. So if I now unclick this, what you'll see, right, they are shown. Let me actually get rid of everything. What you'll see now is, and let's actually make these very easy to see color-wise. So let's make this all 100%, 100%, and 100%. So this is that same rule that you kind of see here, right? The higher time frame, or the validation time frames 5, 10, or 20 is also being flushed to or below. So in this case, we flushed below that, right? And this is, again, a staple of MBs accumulating to the top side. And again, notice the entry I personally took. Where was it and what happened in reference to the validation time frames moving averages? Price had flushed down under the 5, 10, or 20, right? So in this case, it came under the 5, 10, and 20, and then started to accumulate out of there. And those are the entries I took. And then if we overlay that with the actual entry, we came and flushed under the 10 and 20, which is what, again, we've discussed and have now understood as a characteristic of price. So again, this is where we get into like the nitty-gritty details of more technical, so you can see it yourself. Where the deeper flush is happening to this 10, 20 EMA on the entry time frame, or just under or to the 5, 10, 20 on the V, right? So they work synonymously, they work together. And this is one way that you can view that. Similarly, if I just simply go to the daily or the 6 hour, right, you're going to see that same thing, right? Here you are. You have that impulse, you have that pullback into the 10, 20, right? As you can see right here, and then you have that continuation, which beautifully outlines and continuously shows you this example that we spoke about before, where we are starting a validation-based move that's going to line up for the entry-based move that we already have seen, right? So we know the entry was around here or here, and now we know the validation looks like this, right? You can literally see it. Price comes from whatever this was, starts an accumulation right through this, makes a push, that's probably somewhere from this 1, makes a push, pauses, starts this number 2, right? So starts a second stage or a buildup of a second MB, goes, then you kind of get this maybe 3, then you kind of get this 4, this kind of choppy 4, and from there, right after the 4th or so, you can see we get into chop territory and we kind of fall off, right? But that's a trade I personally traded, and again, it was one of my best trades, but I want to show you it from the exact same perspective of the things I'm teaching you now in terms of characteristics, right? These are characteristics of these entry bases, right? And that's what creates those really nice opportunities. That's where they're coming from, right? So now you understand how they might interact with some of the moving averages, even though you might not understand 100% why these moving averages are used or what is the purpose of them, which is going to be discussed in the moving average section. But as I said, as we teach and we look at examples, we build on that knowledge over and over and over again. You gain expertise as to how to use it, how to understand it, how to view it. You gain better tools to actually see it for yourself and use it for yourself and get better to do it for yourself. And then we can get into further explanation of like why. So that's another big characteristic of the accumulation-based MBs, right? Now, as a result of them being accumulation-based MBs, they're of course fit for much larger runs, which means that you can potentially have more R out of them, which means that, again, you have the freedom to play around with how you're going to partial into moves. You have the freedom to decide, are you going to be a quicker partialer based on the based on the data that you've collected thus far? Are you going to be someone that holds on to a much larger position and just lets the market go if it wants to go, and then partials into huge strength? It also gives you the ability, or it makes sense to give the move space to go higher, right? And think why in terms of flushes. Of course, if you're entering through these flushes or these stage 1s and 2s, right, and you get in, then you position yourself in a way that even future flushes may not take you out of the market. And if that's the case, then of course you want to be there for more of the move. So as another characteristic or benefit to trading accumulation-based MBs, right, it makes more sense to give the move space to go, right? And it's fit for larger runs. And basically, these are just some of the characteristics that I could think of to the top of my head of the accumulation based MBs. Okay, let's do momentum now in the next one.